The wagon rattled to a stop in front of a cabin barely bigger than a shed, and Lila Mercer's heart sank like a stone dropped in deep water. 19 years old, traded like livestock to pay off her father's debts, she'd crossed 200 miles of empty prairie to marry a man whose face she'd never seen. Now he stood in the doorway, tall, weathered, silent, staring at her like she was a problem he hadn't asked for. No smile, no welcome, just cold eyes and colder silence. This was her life now. A bargain struck on the edge of nowhere, with a stranger who looked at her like she was already a mistake. If you want to see how a marriage built on debt and distance becomes something neither of them expected, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The wind never stopped on the high plains. It scraped across the land like a blade on whetstone, relentless and mean, carrying dust that worked its way into everything: clothes, food, lungs. Lila Mercer had been riding in the back of a freight wagon for 3 days, and the wind had been her only companion besides the driver, a grim man named Polk, who hadn't said more than 10 words since they left Kansas City. She sat on a crate of dry goods, her dress dusty and wrinkled, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, empty except for a few crows circling lazy overhead. The land stretched flat in every direction, broken only by the occasional scrub brush or the bones of something long dead. "How much further?" she asked. Polk spat over the side of the wagon. "Hour. Maybe less." That was the longest answer he'd given her all day. Lila nodded and looked down at her hands. They were small, calloused from years of washing clothes and scrubbing floors, but they didn't feel strong. They felt like they belonged to someone else, someone who'd had choices. She'd never met Rowan Hale, didn't know what he looked like, how old he was, whether he was kind or cruel. All she knew was that he'd agreed to take her as a wife in exchange for clearing her father's debts so deep they'd swallowed the family whole. Her mother had cried when the arrangements were made. Her father had looked relieved. "Better this than the poorhouse," he'd said. Lila hadn't argued. What was the point? The deal was done. The wagon lurched over a rut, and she grabbed the side to keep from falling. Up ahead, a dark smudge appeared on the horizon, a cluster of buildings maybe, or just a trick of the light. As they got closer, the smudge took shape. A cabin, low and rough-built, with a chimney that leaned slightly to one side. Behind it, a barn that looked like it had been patched together from scrap wood, a fence made of crooked posts, a stretch of empty corral. It wasn't much, it was less than much. Polk pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the wind. "This is it," he said. Lila climbed down, her legs stiff and aching. The ground was hard-packed dirt, cracked in places where the sun had baked it dry. She stood there holding her small cloth bag and looked at the cabin. The door was closed. No smoke rose from the chimney. "You know I'm coming?" she asked. "He knows." Polk didn't offer to help with her bag. He didn't wait to see if anyone came out to greet her. He just clicked his tongue at the horses and turned the wagon around, heading back the way they'd come. And then she was alone. The wind tugged at her skirt, and the crows overhead called out in their harsh, mocking voices. Lila walked toward the cabin, each step feeling like it took more effort than the last. She stopped a few feet from the door and waited. Nothing. She cleared her throat. "Hello?" Still nothing. She knocked, light at first, then harder. The door opened. The man standing there was tall, taller than she'd expected, with broad shoulders and a weathered face that looked like it had been carved out of the same hard ground he stood on. His hair was dark, streaked with gray at the temples, and his eyes were a pale, cold blue. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just looked at her. "I'm Lila," she said, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. "Lila Mercer. I know who you are." His voice was low, rough, like he didn't use it much. He stepped aside, holding the door open. "Come in." She hesitated, then walked past him into the cabin. It was dim inside, lit only by the pale light coming through a single small window. The room was spare. A table, 2 chairs, an iron stove in the corner, a narrow bed against the far wall. Everything was clean, but there was no warmth to it, no color, no life. Rowan closed the door behind her and stood with his back to it, arms folded across his chest. He didn't look angry. He didn't look anything, just blank. You hungry? He asked. A little. He nodded toward the table. Sit. She set her bag down and sat, her hands still folded in her lap. Rowan moved to the stove and ladled something from a pot into a bowl. Stew, maybe, or soup. He set it in front of her along with a spoon and a chunk of bread. Thank you, she said. He didn't answer, just poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the wall, watching her. She ate slowly, trying not to make noise, trying not to look at him. The stew was plain but hot, and the bread was dense and dry. It didn't matter. She was too nervous to taste anything. When she finished, he took the bowl without a word and set it in a basin by the stove. You'll sleep there, he said, nodding toward the bed. She looked at it, then back at him. Where will you sleep? Floor? You don't have to. I do. His tone didn't invite argument. Lila nodded, her throat tight. She didn't know what she'd expected, kindness maybe, or at least some attempt at conversation, but this cold, careful distance was worse than hostility. At least hostility was something she could understand. Rowan poured the rest of his coffee into the dirt outside and came back in, closing the door against the wind. He pulled a blanket from a trunk in the corner and spread it on the floor near the stove. You need anything, say so, he said. Otherwise, get some rest. She stopped, not sure what she wanted to say. He looked at her, waiting. I just want you to know, she said carefully. I didn't ask for this, but I'll try to be useful. I can cook and clean and mend things. I won't be a burden. Something flickered in his eyes, something she couldn't name, but it was gone before she could catch it. You're not a burden, he said quietly. You're just here. And with that, he lay down on the floor, turned his back to her, and said nothing else. Lila sat on the edge of the bed, her hands gripping the rough wool blanket, and stared at the back of his head. The silence pressed in around her, thick and suffocating. Outside, the wind howled, and the land stretched on forever, empty and indifferent. She lay down fully clothed, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and closed her eyes. But sleep didn't come easy. The first week passed in a blur of silence and routine. Rowan woke before dawn every day, dressed without a word, and went out to work the land. Lila would wake to the sound of the door closing and lie there in the dim light, listening to the wind and the distant lowing of cattle. She got up, dressed, and set about making herself useful. She swept the floor, washed the dishes, mended a tear in one of Rowan's shirts. She found a sack of flour and some lard and baked bread, though it came out heavy and uneven. She put it on the table anyway. When Rowan came in at midday, he ate the bread without comment. Didn't complain, didn't thank her, just ate, drank water from the bucket, and went back out. It was maddening. By the third day, she couldn't take it anymore. Do I displease you? She asked that evening as they sat across from each other at the table. He looked up from his plate, his expression unreadable. No. Then why won't you talk to me? I talk. Barely. He set his fork down and leaned back in his chair, studying her. What do you want me to say? I don't know. Anything. Something. I've been here 3 days and I don't know the first thing about you. What do you need to know? She faltered. I don't know. Your age, where you're from, why you agreed to this. I'm 34, Sal, he said. Came out here from Missouri 10 years ago. Agreed to this because I needed help and you needed a way out. It was the most he'd said to her since she'd arrived, and it left her with more questions than answers. That's it? She asked. That's it. You don't care that I'm a stranger? Everyone's a stranger at first. And you don't mind that I was traded? Like property? His jaw tightened, and for the first time she saw something other than blankness in his face. Anger, maybe, or shame. I mind, he said quietly, but it doesn't change the deal. So that's all I am to you. A deal. No. He stood, picking up his plate and hers. You're a person, and I'm not going to treat you otherwise. He turned away, and she felt something crack inside her chest, something small and fragile and unexpected. Not hope, exactly, but something close. The days began to take on a rhythm. Rowan worked the land, mending fences, tending the small herd of cattle, plowing the rocky soil. Lila kept the cabin, cooked what little they had, and tried to make sense of the man she'd been bound to. He wasn't cruel, that much was clear, but he wasn't warm either. He was careful, controlled, like he'd built a wall around himself and didn't intend to let anyone through. Still, there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when the wall seemed to crack. One morning, she woke to find a bucket of fresh water sitting just inside the door. She hadn't heard him bring it in. Another day, she came back from hanging laundry to find the heavy iron pot she'd been struggling with moved to a lower shelf where she could reach it easier. He never said anything about it, never drew attention to it. But she noticed, and slowly, carefully, she began to notice other things too. The way he always made sure there was enough firewood stacked by the stove before he went to bed. The way he never raised his voice, even when the cow broke through the fence and he spent an hour chasing it down. The way he slept on the floor every night, without complaint, even though his back had to be aching. He was keeping his distance, but it wasn't cruelty. It was something else. One evening, as they sat by the stove after supper, she asked him about it. "Why do you sleep on the floor?" He didn't look up from the piece of leather he was mending. "You know why. Because you think I'm afraid of you. Aren't you?" She thought about it. At first, maybe, but not anymore. He glanced at her, then went back to his work. "Good. So why keep doing it?" "Because I gave you my word," he said, "that you'd be safe here, that I wouldn't—" He trailed off, his jaw working. "I don't go back on my word." Lila felt something shift inside her. It wasn't affection, not yet, but it was respect. "I believe you," she said. He nodded once, and they sat in silence for a while longer. Outside, the wind howled, but inside the cabin, the air felt a little warmer. A month passed, then another. The silence between them began to feel less like a wall and more like a language, one they were both learning to speak. Rowan still didn't talk much, but he started asking questions. Small ones at first. "You know how to ride?" "A little. My father had a horse when I was young." "Can you shoot?" "Never tried." He taught her. Took her out behind the barn one morning with an old rifle and showed her how to hold it, how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze the trigger instead of pulling it. She missed the first 6 shots, hit a fence post on the 7th. "Not bad," he said. She grinned, surprised by the rush of pride. "Really? You'll get better." And she did. He made her practice every few days until she could hit a tin can at 20 paces more often than not. "Why are you teaching me this?" she asked one afternoon as they walked back to the cabin. "Because if I'm not here, you need to be able to protect yourself." "Where would you be?" "Could be anywhere, town, out with the herd, injured, dead." The bluntness of it startled her. "Don't say that. It's the truth. Out here, you don't get to pretend things are safe." She looked at him, at the hard line of his jaw and the steady, unflinching way he met her gaze. "Then I'm glad you're teaching me," she said. He nodded. "Me too." It was a small thing, but it mattered. And over the weeks that followed, there were more small things. The way he started sitting at the table a little longer after supper, nursing a cup of coffee while she mended or read from the one book she'd brought with her. The way he let her help with the cattle, showing her how to check for illness, how to move them without spooking them. The way he didn't flinch when her hand brushed his as they worked side by side. They were building something, slowly, carefully. Something that didn't have a name yet, but felt real all the same. And then the storm came. It started as a line of dark clouds on the western horizon, low and heavy, moving fast. Rowan saw it first and swore under his breath. "Get inside, he said. "Now." "What's wrong?" "Storm. Bad one." She followed him into the cabin, and he barred the door, checked the shutters, made sure everything was secure. Outside, the wind picked up, howling like a living thing. The sky turned the color of a bruise, and the first drops of rain hit the roof like gravel. "Stay away from the window," Rowan said, his voice tight. Lila nodded, but her eyes went to the barn. "The animals. They'll be fine." "What if—" "They'll be fine." But even as he said it, she saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. The storm hit hard. Rain pounded the roof and the wind shrieked, rattling the shutters and shaking the walls. Lightning cracked across the sky, so bright it turned the world white for an instant, and the thunder that followed was close enough to feel in her chest. They sat together in the dim cabin, listening to the storm rage outside. Rowan didn't speak, but his presence was solid, steady. Lila found herself sitting closer to him than she meant to, her shoulder almost touching his. And when the thunder cracked again, so loud it felt like the world was splitting open, she didn't realize she'd grabbed his arm until she felt the warmth of his skin under her fingers. He didn't pull away. "It's all right," he said quietly. "Just noise." "I know." But she didn't let go. The storm lasted hours. By the time it finally passed, the sky was dark, and the only sound was the drip of water from the eaves. Rowan stood, moving toward the door. "I need to check the barn." "I'll come with you." "No, stay here." "Rowan, stay here." He didn't wait for an answer, just opened the door and disappeared into the wet, windy night. Lila stood in the doorway, watching him go, her heart pounding for reasons she didn't entirely understand. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she realized something that scared her more than the storm. She was starting to care. Rowan came back nearly an hour later, soaked through, his boots caked with mud. He didn't say a word, just stripped off his coat and hung it by the stove, then stood there dripping onto the floor. "Everything all right?" Lila asked. "Fence is down on the east side, lost 2 posts, barn's holding, but the roof's leaking." "The animals?" "They're fine." He moved to the basin and washed his hands, scrubbing hard like he was trying to get more than just dirt off. His shoulders were tight, his movements clipped. "You should get out of those clothes," Lila said. "You'll catch cold." "I'm fine." "You're dripping all over the floor." He glanced at her, and something in his expression softened just a fraction. "You sound like a wife." The word hung in the air between them, strange and unfamiliar. Neither of them had used it before. Not once. Lila felt her face warm. "Well, I suppose I am." Rowan didn't answer, just pulled off his wet shirt and grabbed a dry one from the trunk. Lila looked away, but not before she caught a glimpse of the scars on his back. Old ones, long-healed, crisscrossing his skin like a map of something he'd never talked about. She didn't ask. It wasn't her place. Not yet. He dressed quickly and sat down at the table, running a hand through his damp hair. "Storm like that, we'll be digging out for days." "I can help." "You don't need to." "I want to." He looked at her for a long moment, like he was trying to decide whether to argue. Then he nodded. "All right." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the last of the rain tapping against the roof. The fire in the stove crackled, and the room felt smaller than usual, the air thick with something neither of them could name. "You grabbed my arm," Rowan said suddenly. Lila blinked. "What?" "During the storm, when the thunder hit, you grabbed my arm." She felt her face heat again. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes steady on hers. "I just wanted you to know it didn't bother me." She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded, her throat tight. Outside, the wind had died down to a low moan, and the world felt quiet again. But inside the cabin, something had shifted, something small and fragile, like the first crack in ice before it breaks. The next morning, they went out to survey the damage. The fence was worse than Rowan had said. 4 posts snapped clean through, the wire tangled and half buried in mud. The cattle had wandered into the far pasture, and it took them most of the morning to round them up and get them back where they belonged. Lila worked without complaint, her dress soaked and heavy, her hands raw from gripping the rough wire. Rowan didn't tell her to stop, didn't tell her to go back inside. He just worked alongside her, and when she stumbled in the mud, he caught her elbow and steadied her without a word. By the time they finished, the sun was high and hot, baking the wet ground into sticky clay. Lila's arms ached and her fingers were blistered, but she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Useful. Needed. "You did good," Rowan said as they walked back toward the cabin. "I didn't do much." "You did enough." It wasn't much of a compliment, but coming from him, it felt like more. That evening, as they sat down to supper, beans and cornbread, plain but filling, Rowan cleared his throat. "I'm going into town tomorrow," he said. "Need to pick up supplies. Wire, nails, a few other things. Can I come?" He frowned. "It's a long ride, 6 hours each way." "I don't mind." He studied her, his expression unreadable. "You sure?" "I haven't left this place since I got here. I'd like to see something besides dirt and sky." He nodded slowly. "All right, but we leave at dawn." "I'll be ready." She was. When the first light crept over the horizon, she was already dressed, her hair tied back, her boots laced tight. Rowan saddled the horses, 2 of them, both old but steady, and helped her up onto the smaller mare. "You remember how to ride?" he asked. "I'll manage." He swung up onto his own horse, a big roan gelding with a scar on its flank, and they set off across the plains. The land stretched out flat and endless, broken only by the occasional rise or gully. The sky was pale and clear, and the air smelled like dust and dry grass. They rode in silence for the first hour, the only sounds the creak of leather and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. Then Rowan spoke. "You ever been to a frontier town?" "No, just the city where I grew up." "This won't be like that." "I didn't think it would be." He glanced at her. "Just don't expect much. It's rough. People are rough." "I can handle rough." "I know." The way he said it made her chest tighten, like he meant it, like he'd seen something in her that she hadn't seen in herself. They reached the town just after midday. It was small, barely more than a wide dirt street lined with crooked buildings. A general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, a livery, a few houses scattered on the outskirts. The whole place had a tired, worn-down look, like it had been built in a hurry and nobody had bothered to fix it since. Rowan tied the horses outside the general store and helped Lila down. She stood in the street, looking around, and felt a strange mix of disappointment and relief. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Stay close," Rowan said. "Don't wander." "I won't." They went inside, and the store was dim and cramped, smelling of tobacco and old wood. A man stood behind the counter, heavy-set and balding, with a stained apron tied around his waist. "Rowan," the man said, his voice flat. "Been a while. Had my hands full." The man's eyes flicked to Lila, and his expression shifted, curious, appraising. "This the girl?" Lila felt her spine stiffen. The girl, like she was a package that had been delivered. "This is my wife," Rowan said, his tone edged with something sharp. "Lila." The man blinked, then nodded quickly. "Right. Mrs. Hale. Pleasure." Lila forced a smile. "Thank you." Rowan handed the man a list, and they spent the next hour gathering supplies. Coils of wire, boxes of nails, sacks of flour and beans, a few other odds and ends. Lila wandered the aisles, running her fingers over bolts of fabric and jars of preserves, things she hadn't seen in months. "You need anything?" Rowan asked, coming up beside her. "No, I'm fine." "You sure?" She looked at him, surprised. "I don't want to spend your money." "It's our money. If you need something, get it." She hesitated, then picked up a small tin of salve. "My hands are cracked. This might help." "Get it." She added it to the pile, and he paid without comment. As they loaded the supplies onto the horses, a woman's voice called out from across the street. "Rowan Hale! That you?" Rowan's jaw tightened, but he turned. A woman was crossing toward them, middle-aged, dressed in a faded calico dress, her face lined and sharp. "Mrs. Tully," Rowan said, his tone carefully neutral. "Haven't seen you in months," the woman said, her eyes already sliding to Lila. "And who's this?" "My wife, Lila." Mrs. Tully's eyebrows shot up. "Wife? Well, I'll be. Didn't think you'd ever take one. Things change." "I suppose they do." The woman looked Lila up and down, her gaze cold and appraising. "You're young." Lila lifted her chin. 19. Mrs. Tully's mouth thinned. "Well, good luck to you, dear. Living out there with him, all alone, can't be easy." "It's fine," Lila said, her voice steadier than she felt. Is it? The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. You let me know if you need anything, woman to woman. I will. Thank you. Mrs. Tully nodded and walked away, and Lila felt something cold settle in her stomach. Don't listen to her, Rowan said quietly. What was that about? She likes to talk, that's all. But Lila could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the reins a little too tight. They rode back in silence, the sun sinking low behind them, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Lila's mind churned, replaying the woman's words, the look in her eyes. When they finally reached the cabin, the sky was dark, and the stars were starting to come out. Rowan unloaded the supplies while Lila tended the horses, brushing them down and making sure they had water. Inside, she started a fire and put on a pot of coffee. Rowan came in and sat at the table, his face drawn and tired. You want to talk about it? Lila asked. About what? That woman. What she said. There's nothing to talk about. Rowan, she's a gossip, he said flatly. Always has been. Doesn't know a damn thing about us. Lila poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down across from him. Then why did it bother you? He didn't answer right away, just stared into his cup like he was looking for something at the bottom. People talk, he said finally. About me. About why I live out here alone. About why I'd agree to marry someone I'd never met. He paused. They don't understand, and I don't care if they do. What do they say? That I'm cold, mean, that I drove off anyone who ever tried to get close. He looked up at her, his eyes hard. Maybe they're right. They're not. You don't know that. Yes, I do. She leaned forward, her voice firm. You've been nothing but decent to me. You gave me a place to sleep, food to eat, taught me to shoot, to ride. You've kept your word. That's more than most men would do. He shook his head. You shouldn't have to be grateful for basic decency. Maybe not, but I am. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling in the stove. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the shutters. Why did you agree to this? Lila asked. Really? Rowan set his cup down and rubbed a hand over his face. Because I was tired, he said quietly. Tired of being alone. Tired of coming back to an empty house every night. I thought, maybe if there was someone here, it would feel different. Does it? He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something raw in his eyes. Something unguarded. Yeah, he said. It does. Lila felt her breath catch. She didn't know what to say, didn't know if there was anything to say, so she just reached across the table and laid her hand over his. He didn't pull away. The days that followed took on a new rhythm. Rowan still worked the land, and Lila still kept the cabin, but the silence between them felt different now, less like a wall, more like a language they were both learning to speak. He started talking more. Not a lot, but enough. He told her about the land, about the seasons, about the way the weather could turn on a dime and kill you if you weren't careful. He told her about the cattle, about which ones were mean and which ones were skittish, about how to read the signs when one was getting sick. And Lila listened. She asked questions. She learned. One morning she woke to find him standing at the stove, frying eggs in the old iron pan. You're cooking? She asked, surprised. Figured you could use a break. She sat down at the table, and he set a plate in front of her. Eggs, a slice of bread, a cup of coffee. Thank you. He shrugged. Don't get used to it. But there was a faint smile on his face, and it made something warm bloom in her chest. They ate together, the morning light slanting through the window, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Lila felt something close to contentment. It didn't last. A few days later, Rowan came in from the barn, his face grim. What's wrong? Lila asked. One of the cows is in labor. It's not going well. What do you mean? Calf's turned wrong. She can't push it out on her own. Lila's stomach dropped. What do we do? I've got to help her. Pull the calf out before she dies. Do you need me? He hesitated. Yeah, I do. They went out to the barn together, and the sight that met them made Lila's breath catch. The cow was lying on her side, her breathing labored, her eyes rolling in pain. There was blood on the straw, and the smell of it was sharp and metallic. "She's been at it for hours," Rowan said. "If we don't do something soon, we'll lose them both." "What do I do?" "Hold her steady. Talk to her. Keep her calm." Lila knelt by the cow's head, running her hands over the animal's neck, murmuring soft, nonsensical words. The cow's breathing was ragged, her whole body trembling. Rowan rolled up his sleeves and knelt at the cow's hindquarters. "This is going to be rough," he said. "Don't look if you don't want to." But Lila didn't look away. She watched as he reached inside the cow, his face tight with concentration, his hands slick with blood. The cow bellowed, a deep, agonized sound, and Lila held on tighter, her own heart pounding. "Come on," Rowan muttered. "Come on, damn it." He pulled, slow and steady, and after what felt like an eternity, the calf came free, small, wet, motionless. Lila's heart sank. "Is it?" Rowan didn't answer, just grabbed a handful of straw and started rubbing the calf's chest hard and fast. "Breathe," he said. "Come on, breathe." Nothing. He rubbed harder, his jaw clenched, his hands moving with desperate precision, and then finally the calf coughed, a weak, wet sound. Its sides heaved and it drew in a shaky breath. "There you go," Rowan said, his voice rough. "There you go." The cow lifted her head, lowing softly, and the calf struggled to its feet, wobbly but alive. Lila felt tears prick her eyes, and she didn't try to stop them. Rowan sat back on his heels, his hands covered in blood, his face exhausted. "We did it," he said. "You did it. We did it." He looked at her, and something passed between them, something unspoken but clear. They cleaned up as best they could and went back to the cabin. Rowan washed his hands in the basin, scrubbing until the water ran clear, and Lila put on a pot of coffee, her hands still shaking. "You all right?" he asked. "I think so. You?" "Yeah." He sat down at the table and she brought him a cup of coffee. He took it, his hands steady now, and drank in silence. "Thank you," he said after a while. "For what?" "For not running, for staying." "Where would I go?" He looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her chest tighten. "I don't know, but you could have." "I didn't want to." He nodded, and they sat together in the dim light, the silence between them warm and easy. That night, Rowan didn't sleep on the floor. He pulled a chair close to the stove and sat there instead, his eyes half closed, keeping watch. Lila lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and felt something settle inside her, something that felt almost like hope. The weeks that followed were hard. The fence still needed mending, the roof still leaked, and the work never seemed to end. But they worked together now, side by side, and the silence between them felt less like a burden and more like a choice. Rowan taught her to repair a fence, to patch a roof, to tell when the weather was turning. Lila taught him how to make bread that didn't come out like a brick, how to mend a shirt without leaving crooked stitches, how to laugh at something small and stupid. And slowly, carefully, they built something that felt real. One evening, as they sat by the stove after supper, Rowan spoke. "I'm glad you're here," he said. Lila looked at him, surprised. "Yeah?" "Yeah." "I'm glad I'm here too." He smiled. Just a small fleeting thing, but it was enough. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Lila thought that maybe, just maybe, this place could feel like home. The next morning came with a sky so clear it hurt to look at, the kind of blue that stretched on forever without a single cloud to break it up. Lila woke to the sound of Rowan moving around the cabin, quieter than usual, and when she sat up, she saw him standing by the window, staring out at the land. "Something wrong?" she asked. He turned, and there was something different in his face. Not worry exactly, more like anticipation. "Storm's coming," he said. "Big one. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. But it's coming." "How do you know?" "The air, the way the cattle are acting. You learn to read it after a while." Lila got up and joined him at the window. The sky looked perfect to her, unmarked and calm, but she didn't argue. She'd learned not to question him about things like this. "What do we need to do?" she asked. "Secure everything. Bring the animals in close. Make sure the roof's as tight as we can get it." He looked at her. "It's going to be a long day." He wasn't wrong. They worked straight through until noon without stopping, dragging tools into the barn, reinforcing the fence where it was weakest, checking every latch and hinge. Rowan climbed up on the roof and hammered down loose shingles while Lila hauled buckets of water from the well and filled every container they had. By the time the sun started to sink, they were both exhausted, but the work still wasn't done. "Go inside, Rosniki," Rowan said as he came down from the roof. "Get some food together. I need to bring the herd in." "I'll help." "Lila, I know how to do it now. You showed me." He looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't, just nodded. "All right, but stay close." They rode out together, and the cattle were skittish, moving in restless circles, their eyes rolling. The air had changed. Lila could feel it now, heavy and electric, like something was pressing down on the world. It took them over an hour to get the herd into the near pasture and close the gate. By the time they got back to the barn, the wind had started to pick up, gusting hard enough to whip Lila's hair across her face. "That's it," Rowan said, dismounting. "We're done. Inside, now." They barely made it through the door before the first crack of thunder split the sky. The storm hit harder than anything Lila had ever seen. The wind howled like something alive and furious, rattling the shutters so hard she thought they'd tear off. Rain hammered the roof in sheets, and the thunder was so loud and so close it felt like the earth itself was breaking apart. Rowan barred the door and checked the windows, his movements quick and efficient. Lila stood in the center of the room, her heart pounding, trying not to let the fear show on her face. "It's all right," Rowan said, coming over to her. "The cabin's solid. We're safe. What about the animals?" "They're in the barn. They'll be fine." But even as he said it, she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes kept flicking toward the door. They sat together at the table, a single candle burning between them, and listened to the storm rage. Lightning flashed through the cracks in the shutters, turning the room white for an instant, and the thunder followed so close it felt like it was inside the cabin with them. "How long will it last?" Lila asked. "Could be hours. Could be all night." She nodded, her hands folded tight in her lap. Rowan reached across the table and covered them with one of his. "We're all right," he said again, quieter this time. She looked at him, at the steadiness in his eyes, and felt some of the fear ease. "I believe you," she said. They sat like that for a while, his hand warm over hers, the storm roaring outside. And then, suddenly, a new sound cut through the noise, a high, desperate bellow that made Lila's blood run cold. Rowan was on his feet in an instant. "What was that?" Lila asked. "One of the cows." His face had gone tight. "She's in trouble." "How do you know?" "I know." He grabbed his coat and headed for the door. "You can't go out there, Lila said, following him. "It's too dangerous. If she's calving and something's wrong, she'll die if I don't help her." "Then I'm coming with you." "No." "Rowan, no." He turned to face her, his voice hard. "You stay here. I mean it. And what if something happens to you? What if you get hurt and I'm sitting here doing nothing? That's the deal. You stay safe. I'm not a child. I know that." His voice softened just a fraction. "But I need you here, please." She wanted to argue, wanted to push back, but the look in his eyes stopped her. "Be careful," she said. "I will." And then he was gone, the door slamming shut behind him, swallowed by the wind and the rain. Lila stood in the center of the cabin, her fists clenched at her sides, listening to the storm and the silence that followed. Minutes passed, then more. The candle flickered, casting shadows on the walls, and every sound made her jump. She couldn't just sit there. She grabbed her shawl and wrapped it around her shoulders, then went to the door. Her hand hovered over the latch for a moment, and she thought about what Rowan had said. "Stay safe. Stay here." But the bellow came again, louder this time, more desperate, and she couldn't stand it anymore. She opened the door and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit her like a physical blow, nearly knocking her off her feet. The rain was so heavy she could barely see, and the ground was slick with mud that sucked at her boots with every step. She pushed forward, her shawl whipping around her, her hair plastered to her face. The barn door was open, banging in the wind, and she stumbled toward it, her heart pounding. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of wet hay and animal fear. The horses were stamping in their stalls, and the cattle were shifting restlessly, their eyes wide. And in the far corner, she saw Rowan kneeling beside a cow that was lying on her side, her breathing labored and ragged. The cow's belly was distended, and there was blood on the straw. "Rowan!" Lila shouted over the wind. He looked up, and his face went hard. "I told you to stay inside." "I couldn't." "Damn it, Lila, what's wrong with her?" He didn't answer right away, just turned back to the cow, his hands moving over her belly, pressing and probing. The cow bellowed again, a sound of pure agony, and Lila felt her stomach twist. "The calf's stuck," Rowan said finally. "She's been trying to push for too long. She's exhausted. What can we do?" "I can try to pull it, but she's too weak. If she fights me, she could hemorrhage." He looked at Lila, his face grim. "I need you to keep her calm. Can you do that?" "Yes. I mean it. If she starts thrashing, she could hurt herself. Hurt you." "I can do it." He nodded, and Lila moved to the cow's head, kneeling in the bloody straw. The cow's eyes were rolling, her breath coming in short, desperate gasps. Lila laid a hand on her neck, stroking gently, murmuring the way she had before. "It's all right," she said softly. "You're all right. We're going to help you." The cow's breathing didn't slow, but she stopped thrashing, her eyes fixing on Lila's face. "Good," Rowan said. "Keep talking to her." He moved to the cow's hindquarters and rolled up his sleeves. Lila didn't look, didn't want to see. She just kept her hand on the cow's neck, kept murmuring, kept her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. She heard Rowan swear under his breath, heard the wet, terrible sounds of him working, and the cow bellowed again, trying to lurch to her feet. "Hold her," Rowan said, his voice tight. Lila pressed down harder, using her weight, and the cow settled, trembling violently. "It's all right," Lila said again, her voice breaking. "It's all right." Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Lila lost track of time, lost track of everything except the cow's ragged breathing and the sound of the storm and Rowan's voice, low and urgent, talking to himself or to the cow or to something else entirely. And then, finally, he said, "Got it." Lila looked up and saw him pulling the calf free, small and slick and motionless. Her heart sank. Rowan laid the calf on the straw and immediately started rubbing it with handfuls of hay, hard and fast, just like he'd done before. But this time nothing happened. The calf didn't move, didn't breathe. "Come on," Rowan muttered. "Come on." He rubbed harder, his hands moving with desperate precision, and Lila felt tears prick her eyes. "Rowan, not yet." He kept going, his jaw clenched, his hands never stopping. And then, just when Lila thought it was over, the calf coughed. A weak, wet sound. Its sides heaved, and it drew in a shaky breath. Rowan sat back on his heels, his face exhausted, his hands covered in blood. "There you go," he said quietly. "There you go." The cow lifted her head, lowing softly, and the calf struggled to its feet, wobbly but alive. Lila felt the tears spill over, and she didn't try to stop them. Rowan looked at her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then he stood, wiping his hands on his pants, and came over to her. "You all right?" he asked. "I should be asking you that." "I'm fine." "You're covered in blood." "So are you." She looked down and saw that he was right. Her dress, her hands, her arms, all of it streaked with blood and mud. "We should get cleaned up," she said. "Yeah." But neither of them moved. They just stood there, looking at each other, and then Rowan reached out and brushed a strand of hair off her face, his touch gentle. "You did good," he said. "So did you." He nodded, and they stood there for another moment, the storm still raging outside, the barn dim and quiet except for the sound of the animals settling. Then Rowan stepped back, breaking the moment. "Come on, let's go." They made their way back to the cabin, the rain still pouring, the wind still howling. Inside, Rowan barred the door and started a fire in the stove while Lila peeled off her wet, bloody dress and wrapped herself in a blanket. Rowan washed his hands and arms in the basin, scrubbing until the water ran red, then clean. He pulled off his wet shirt and stood there for a moment, staring into the fire. "You shouldn't have come out there," he said. "I know," You could have been hurt. So could you. He turned to look at her, his eyes hard. That's different. Why? Because you're a man and I'm a woman? Because I can't. He stopped, his jaw working. I can't lose you. The words hung in the air between them, raw and unguarded. Lila felt her breath catch. You won't. You don't know that. Neither do you. He shook his head, running a hand through his damp hair. You don't understand. Then explain it to me. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. I've lost people, he said. More than I care to count. Out here, you lose people. It's just how it is. And I told myself I wouldn't get close to anyone again. Wouldn't let anyone matter. He looked at her. But you do. You matter. And that scares the hell out of me. Lila stood, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, and crossed the room to stand in front of him. I'm scared too, she said. Every day. Of failing. Of not being enough. Of this place breaking me. She reached out and took his hand. But I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me. He looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face. You're sure? I'm sure. He pulled her into his arms, and she felt the tension drain out of him. They stood there, holding each other, the storm raging outside and the fire crackling in the stove. And for the first time, Lila felt like they were truly in this together. The storm finally broke just before dawn, leaving the world soaked and exhausted. Rowan and Lila spent the next few days cleaning up the damage, clearing debris, repairing what had broken, checking on the animals. The cow and her calf were both fine, the calf already stronger, wobbling around the barn on unsteady legs. But something had shifted between them. The careful distance Rowan had kept was gone, replaced by something warmer, something real. He started sleeping in the bed instead of on the floor, though he stayed on the far edge, leaving space between them. Lila didn't mind. It felt right, like they were moving towards something at their own pace. They worked together, ate together, talked more than they ever had, and slowly the cabin started to feel less like a shelter and more like a home. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Rowan spoke. I need to go to town again, he said. Day after tomorrow. Pick up some things we need. Can I come? If you want. I do. He nodded. All right. They rode out 2 days later, the sky clear and the air cool. The town looked the same as it had before, dusty, tired, worn down. Rowan tied the horses outside the general store, and they went inside together. The same heavy-set man was behind the counter, and he nodded at them as they came in. Rowan, Mrs. Hale. Afternoon, Rowan said. They gathered supplies, and Lila wandered the aisles, looking at bolts of fabric, spools of thread, things she hadn't touched in months. She found a small mirror, tarnished but intact, and picked it up, studying her reflection. She looked different, thinner, harder, older. You want that? Rowan asked, coming up beside her. Maybe. Get it. She added it to the pile, and they paid and loaded the supplies onto the horses. As they were about to leave, a woman's voice called out from across the street. Well, well, if it isn't the happy couple. Lila turned and saw Mrs. Tully crossing toward them, a sharp smile on her face. Mrs. Tully, Rowan said, his tone flat. How are you both? Managing out there all alone? We're fine, Lila said. Are you? The woman's eyes flicked over her, appraising. You look tired, dear. Thin. I'm fine. Mrs. Tully's smile didn't waver. You know, I was just saying to Mrs. Polk the other day, it's a shame what happened to you. Lila felt her stomach tighten. Excuse me? Well, you know, being sent out here like that, traded off to settle a debt. It's not right, is what I told her. It's none of your business, Rowan said, his voice hard. Oh, I'm not judging, Rowan. I'm just saying the poor girl didn't have a choice. And now she's stuck out there with you, miles from anywhere, no friends, no family. It's a hard life for someone so young. Lila felt heat rise in her face. I chose to stay. Did you? Mrs. Tully's smile turned pitying. Or did you just not have anywhere else to go? That's enough, Rowan said, stepping forward. But Mrs. Tully wasn't done. I'm just saying, dear, if you ever need help, real help, you know where to find me. A woman shouldn't have to live like that. Alone with a man who barely speaks, barely looks at her. It's not natural. Lila opened her mouth to respond, but Rowan cut her off. We're leaving, he said. Now. He took Lila's arm and guided her toward the horses, his grip firm, but not rough. Lila's heart was pounding, her hands shaking, and she felt something hot and ugly twist in her chest. They rode back in silence, the woman's words echoing in Lila's head. Traded off. No choice. Stuck. Alone. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was setting and the sky was streaked with red and orange. Rowan dismounted and started unloading the supplies without a word. Lila climbed down and stood there, her hands clenched at her sides. She's wrong, Rowan said finally, not looking at her. Is she? He stopped, turning to face her. You think I don't care about you? I don't know what you think. I just told you, the other night. I told you. You said I mattered. That's not the same as… She stopped, her throat tight. As what? As wanting me here, as choosing me. Rowan set down the sack he was holding and crossed the distance between them. You think I'd have said that if I didn't mean it? I don't know. Maybe you just felt sorry for me. Sorry? He laughed, a short, bitter sound. Lila, I don't do things out of pity. I agreed to this because I wanted someone here. And yeah, at first it was just about not being alone. But it's not anymore. Then what is it? He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. It's you. It's the way you didn't run when things got hard. The way you stood in that barn and kept that cow calm even though you were terrified. The way you make this place feel like more than just four walls and a roof. He paused. It's you, Lila, not just anyone. You. She felt tears sting her eyes, and she blinked them back. She said I didn't have a choice. You do now. Do I? Yeah. You can stay. Or you can go. I won't stop you. And if I go? He looked away, his jaw tight. Then I'll go back to the way things were. Alone. Empty. Is that what you want? No. He looked at her again, his voice rough. But I'm not going to keep you here if you don't want to be. Lila stood there, the wind tugging at her hair, the sky darkening overhead. She thought about the woman's words, about the way they'd burrowed under her skin, thought about the cabin, the land, the endless work, and the brutal cold, and the silence that used to feel like a prison. And then she thought about Rowan's hand on hers, the way he'd looked at her in the barn, the way he'd said, "It's you." I want to stay, she said. He let out a breath, and some of the tension left his shoulders. Yeah? Yeah. He stepped closer, and she met him halfway. He cupped her face in his hands, his palms rough and warm, and looked at her like he was memorizing every detail. You're sure? He asked. I'm sure. And then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't careful. It was rough and desperate and real. And Lila kissed him back with everything she had, her hands gripping the front of his shirt, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. When they finally pulled apart, both of them breathing hard, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. I'm not good at this, he said. At what? Talking, showing how I feel. You're doing fine. I mean it. I'm going to mess this up. Probably. So will I. He laughed, a low, quiet sound, and pulled her closer. Then I guess we'll figure it out together. Yeah, Lila said. I guess we will. They stood there for a while, holding each other, the world darkening around them. And when they finally went inside, Rowan didn't sleep on the far edge of the bed. He stayed close, his arm around her, and Lila fell asleep feeling safer than she had in months. The next few weeks felt different. Not easier exactly, but warmer. The work was still brutal, the land still unforgiving, but there was something between them now that made it bearable. More than bearable. On the nights when the wind howled and the cold pressed against the cabin walls, Rowan held her close, and Lila felt like she'd finally found solid ground. But the peace didn't last. It started small. A look from a woman at the general store when they went to town. A muttered comment Lila couldn't quite catch. She told herself it didn't matter, that people would talk no matter what she did, but the whispers followed her like shadows. The third time they went to town, Lila noticed the stairs more clearly. Women clustered together on the boardwalk, their heads bent close, their eyes sliding toward her and then away. One of them, a younger woman with pale hair and a hard mouth, didn't bother hiding it. She stared openly, her expression a mix of pity and something uglier. "Don't pay attention to them," Rowan said quietly as they loaded supplies onto the horses. "I'm trying." "They've got nothing better to do than make up stories." "What kind of stories?" He didn't answer right away, just tightened the straps on the saddlebag and checked the knots twice. "Doesn't matter. It does to me." He turned to face her, his expression hard. "They think I married you because I couldn't get anyone else, that you're some kind of charity case, that we're both desperate and pathetic." He paused. "And they're wrong." "Are they?" The words came out sharper than she meant. Rowan's jaw tightened. "You know they are." But the doubt had already taken root, small and poisonous, working its way under her skin. They rode back in silence, and that night, Lila lay awake long after Rowan had fallen asleep, staring at the dark ceiling and listening to the wind. The woman's voice from weeks ago kept echoing in her head. Traded off. No choice. Stuck. She told herself it wasn't true, told herself she'd made her choice, that she wanted to be here. But in the quiet darkness, the doubts crept in. What if Rowan did see her as a burden? What if he'd only said those things because he felt obligated? What if she was holding him back from something better? The thoughts ate at her night after night until she couldn't ignore them anymore. One morning, about a month after their last trip to town, Lila woke to find Rowan already dressed and standing by the door, his expression tense. "I need to ride out to the far pasture," he said. "Check on the herd, might be gone most of the day." "I can come with you." "No, stay here. There's mending that needs doing and the stove's been smoking. See if you can figure out what's wrong with it." It wasn't like him to give her tasks like that, to keep her behind, and the way he said it, flat and distant, made something in her chest tighten. "All right," she said. He nodded and left without another word. Lila stood in the empty cabin, listening to the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance, and felt the doubt surge back stronger than ever. She tried to work, tried to focus on the mending, on cleaning out the stove, on anything that would keep her hands busy and her mind quiet. But it didn't help. By midday, she was pacing the cabin, her thoughts spiraling. What if he regretted marrying her? What if he was avoiding her because he didn't know how to tell her he wanted her gone? What if she was making his life harder instead of better? She thought about the women in town, about the way they'd looked at her, like she was something to be pitied, something broken. Maybe they were right. The thought hit her like a punch to the stomach, and she had to sit down, her hands shaking. She'd come here with nothing, traded like property to settle a debt she hadn't even incurred. She'd told herself she could make a life here, that she could be useful. But what if that wasn't enough? What if she'd never be enough? By the time Rowan came back that evening, Lila had made up her mind. He came in looking tired, his clothes dusty, and went straight to the basin to wash his hands. "Everything all right out there?" Lila asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Yeah, herd's fine." "Good." He dried his hands and sat down at the table, and Lila set a plate of food in front of him. He ate in silence, and she watched him, her heart pounding. "Rowan," she said finally. He looked up. "I've been thinking." "About what?" She took a breath. "About leaving." His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "What?" "I think maybe it would be better if I went back. To the city. Or somewhere else." He set the fork down slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "Why?" "Because I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." She shook her head. "You say that, but I see the way you look sometimes. Like you're carrying something heavy, like you're tired." "I am tired. It's hard work. That doesn't have anything to do with you." "Doesn't it?" She stood, her hands gripping the back of the chair. "Those women in town, they're right. I didn't choose this. Not really. I was sent here because I had nowhere else to go. And maybe I'm just fooling myself thinking I can make a life here. You are making a life here. Am I? Or am I just existing, taking up space in your house, eating your food, using your resources? Rowan stood, his chair scraping against the floor. Stop. I'm trying to be honest. No, you're trying to run. The words hit her like a slap. I'm not. Yes, you are. He crossed the room, standing in front of her, his eyes blazing. You're scared, so you're looking for a reason to leave, and you're using those women's gossip as an excuse. It's not an excuse. It's the truth. It's not the truth. The truth is you matter to me. The truth is this place was empty before you got here, and it's not empty anymore. The truth is I don't want you to go. But what if I'm holding you back? From what? His voice rose, frustration cracking through. From what, Lila? From being alone? From working myself to death with no one to talk to, no one to come home to? You think that's better? Maybe it is. Maybe you'd be happier. I wouldn't. You don't know that. Yes, I do. He grabbed her shoulders, not hard, but firm enough to make her look at him. I know because I lived it. For 10 years, I lived it, and it was hell. And then you came, and it wasn't hell anymore. It was hard, yeah, but it was something. It meant something. Lila felt tears sting her eyes. I just don't want you to wake up one day and regret this. Regret me. I won't. You can't promise that. Yes, I can. His voice softened and he let go of her shoulders, his hands dropping to his sides. I'm not good with words. I know that. But I'm going to say this once, and I need you to hear me. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. I didn't marry you because I felt sorry for you, he said. I married you because I needed help, yeah, but also because I thought maybe, just maybe, having someone here would make this place feel like more than just survival. And it does. You do. He paused, his eyes searching hers. You turned this house into a home. You taught me how to laugh again. You made me remember what it's like to care about someone. And if you leave, it'll go back to the way it was. Empty, cold. And I don't want that. Rowan, I'm not done. His voice was rough, but steady. You think you're a burden, but you're not. You're the best thing that's happened to me in years. And if those women in town can't see that, then they're blind. But I see it. Every day. I see it. The tears spilled over and Lila didn't try to stop them. I'm scared. I know. I'm scared I'm not enough. You are. I'm scared you'll change your mind. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears. I won't. How do you know? Because I already did. She looked at him, confused. What? I changed my mind, he said quietly. At the beginning, I thought this was just about not being alone, about having someone to help with the work, but it's not anymore. It's about you, and I don't want anyone else. I want you. Lila felt something break open inside her, and she threw her arms around his neck, holding on like she was drowning, and he was the only thing keeping her afloat. He held her just as tightly, his face buried in her hair, and they stood there in the dim cabin, clinging to each other. I'm sorry, she whispered. Don't be. I should have trusted you. You're trusting me now. That's enough. They stood there for a long time, and when they finally pulled apart, Rowan wiped the last of the tears from her face and kissed her forehead. You're not going anywhere, he said. I'm not going anywhere, she repeated. Good. That night, they lay in bed together, and Rowan held her close, his arm around her waist, his breath warm against her neck. Lila felt the fear start to fade, replaced by something steadier, something that felt like trust. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For not giving up on me. I could say the same thing. She smiled in the darkness. I guess we're both stubborn. Yeah, I guess we are. But the peace was fragile, and the world outside had other plans. The next morning, Rowan rode into town alone to pick up a part for the plow that had broken. He told Lila he'd be back by afternoon, and she spent the morning cleaning and cooking, trying to keep herself busy. But when the sun started to sink and he still hadn't returned, she began to worry. By the time the sky turned dark, she was pacing the cabin, her stomach in knots. She told herself he was fine, that he'd just been delayed, but the fear wouldn't let go. It was nearly midnight when she finally heard the sound of hoofbeats. She ran to the door and threw it open, relief flooding through her. But the relief died when she saw his face. He dismounted slowly, his movements stiff, and she saw the blood on his sleeve. "What happened?" she asked, rushing to him. "I'm fine. You're bleeding. It's nothing. Rowan, I said I'm fine." His voice was sharper than she'd ever heard it, and she stepped back, startled. He brushed past her into the cabin and went straight to the basin, peeling off his coat and shirt. There was a long gash on his upper arm, deep enough to need stitching. "What happened?" Lila asked again, her voice shaking. He didn't answer right away, just grabbed a cloth and pressed it against the wound, his jaw clenched. "There was a fight," he said finally. "A fight? With who?" "Some men in town. They were saying things. About you. About us." Lila felt her stomach drop. "What kind of things?" "Doesn't matter. It does to me." He looked at her, his eyes hard. "They said you were a whore. That I bought you. That you were probably sleeping with half the men in town by now." The words hit her like a physical blow, and she had to sit down, her legs suddenly weak. "And you fought them," she said. "Yeah." "Why?" "Because they were wrong." "But now you're hurt." "I don't care." "I do." Her voice broke, and she stood, crossing to him. "You can't keep doing this. You can't keep fighting every person who says something cruel. Watch me. Rowan, they don't get to talk about you like that. And you don't get to throw yourself into fights over gossip." She grabbed the cloth from his hand and pressed it against the wound herself, her hands shaking. "You could have been killed." "I wasn't." "But you could have been. And for what? To defend my honor? I don't need that." "Yes, you do." "No, I don't. I need you alive. I need you here." He looked at her, and some of the anger drained from his face. "I couldn't just stand there and let them say those things." "I know, but you have to." "I can't. Then we'll leave. We'll go somewhere else, somewhere they don't know us." "And start over? With what money? What resources?" She didn't have an answer. He sighed and sat down, and she knelt in front of him, cleaning the wound as gently as she could. It was deep, and it needed stitches, and her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the needle. "Let me," Rowan said, reaching for it. "I can do it. Lila, I can do it." She threaded the needle and started stitching, her hands steadying as she worked. Rowan didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, just watched her face as she concentrated. When she finished, she tied off the thread and sat back, exhausted. There, she said. "Done." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just promise you won't do that again." "I can't promise that." "Rowan, I can't." He reached out and took her hand. "I know you don't want me fighting, and I'll try not to. But I'm not going to stand by and let people treat you like that. I can't." She looked at him, at the stubborn set of his jaw, and knew he meant it. "Then we figure this out together," she said. "No more running off alone. No more keeping things from each other. We face it together." He nodded. "Together." They sat there for a while, her hand in his, the silence heavy but not uncomfortable. And when they finally went to bed, Lila lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She couldn't keep living like this, waiting for the next cruel comment, the next fight, the next wound. Something had to change. The next morning, she woke with a plan. "I'm going to town," she said as Rowan came in from feeding the horses. He frowned. "Why?" "Because I'm tired of hiding, tired of letting those women think they've won." "Lila, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. I'm not going to let them control my life. I'm going to walk into that town, and I'm going to hold my head up, and I'm going to show them I'm not ashamed. And if they say something, then I'll deal with it." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but I'm coming with you." "You don't have to." "I know, but I'm coming anyway." They rode into town together, and Lila felt her heart pounding the entire way. When they reached the main street, she dismounted and walked straight to the general store, her head high, her shoulders back. The store was crowded, and the conversation died the moment she walked in. Every eye turned to her, and the silence was thick and suffocating. Lila ignored it. She walked to the counter and asked for thread, her voice steady. The man behind the counter hesitated, then handed it to her. She paid, thanked him, and turned to leave. And that's when Mrs. Tully stepped in front of her. "Well, well," the woman said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look who's here. The little bride." Lila met her gaze unflinching. "Mrs. Tully." "How are you, dear? Still managing out there all alone with him?" "I'm not alone. I'm with my husband." "Your husband?" The woman's smile was cruel. "Is that what you call him? Even though he bought you like livestock?" The words hung in the air, and Lila felt every eye in the store on her. "He didn't buy me," Lila said quietly. "He gave me a choice, and I chose to stay." "Did you? Or did you just not have anywhere else to go?" "I chose," Lila said, louder this time, "and I'd choose it again." Mrs. Tully's smile faltered just for a moment, and Lila felt a surge of strength. "You don't know anything about my life," Lila continued. "You don't know what it's like out there. You don't know what we've been through, and you don't get to judge me." "I'm not judging, dear. I'm just saying you are judging. You've been judging since the day I arrived. You and every other woman in this town. You look at me like I'm something to be pitied, but I don't need your pity. I have a home. I have a husband who cares about me, and I have a life that's mine. That's more than a lot of people can say." The room was silent. Mrs. Tully's face had gone red, and she opened her mouth to respond, but Lila didn't wait to hear it. She turned and walked out of the store, her head high, her heart pounding. Rowan was waiting by the horses, and when he saw her face, he smiled. "You all right?" he asked. "Yeah, I'm all right." "What did you say to her?" "The truth." He laughed, a real genuine laugh, and pulled her into his arms. "That's my girl." They rode back together, and for the first time in weeks, Lila felt light, free. But the fight wasn't over. Not yet. The ride back from town felt different, lighter. The weight that had been sitting on Lila's chest for weeks had lifted, replaced by something that felt almost like pride. She'd stood up to Mrs. Tully, to the whispers, to the judgment, and she hadn't crumbled. She'd held her ground. Rowan rode beside her, quiet but present, and every so often she caught him glancing at her with something that looked like admiration. "What?" she asked finally. "Nothing. Just thinking." "About what?" "About how you're tougher than you look." She smiled. "I had a good teacher." "I didn't teach you that. That was all you." They reached the cabin as the sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Rowan dismounted and helped her down, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not running, for staying, for fighting." She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I'm not going anywhere." "Good." They stood there for a moment, the world quiet around them, and then Rowan leaned down and kissed her. It was slow and gentle, different from the desperate urgency of before, and when they pulled apart, Lila felt something settle deep in her chest, something that felt like home. That night, they sat by the fire and talked, really talked, about the future, about what they wanted, about how to build a life that was theirs and no one else's. Rowan admitted he'd been thinking about expanding the herd, maybe getting a few more acres if they could afford it. Lila talked about planting a garden in the spring, about learning to preserve food so they wouldn't have to rely so heavily on trips to town. "We could make this work," she said. "Really work. We already are. I mean, bigger, better, something we're proud of." He nodded. "Yeah, I'd like that." They went to bed that night with plans in their heads and hope in their hearts. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Lila fell asleep without a single doubt. But the next morning brought a visitor. Lila was outside hanging laundry when she heard the sound of a horse approaching. She looked up and saw a man riding toward the cabin, middle-aged and well-dressed, his coat clean and his boots polished. He didn't look like he belonged out here. Rowan came out of the barn, wiping his hands on his pants, and his face went tight when he saw the man. "Rowan Hale," the man called out as he dismounted. "That's me." "My name is Thomas Greer. I'm a land agent out of Kansas City." Lila felt her stomach drop. Land agent. That never meant anything good. "What do you want?" Rowan asked, his tone flat. "I'm here on behalf of the Consolidated Land Company. We've been buying up properties in this region, and we're prepared to make you a very generous offer for yours." "Not interested." Greer smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You haven't even heard the offer." "Don't need to. This land's not for sale. Mr. Hale, I understand your attachment, but you should at least consider I said no." The man's smile thinned. "The company is offering 3 times what this land is worth. Cash. Enough to buy a better property somewhere else, somewhere easier to work. I don't want somewhere else. Mr. Hale, be reasonable. This land is hard. The soil's poor, the water's scarce, the winters are brutal. You could take this money and start over somewhere that doesn't fight you every step of the way." "I like the fight." Greer's expression hardened. "The company is going to develop this region, whether you cooperate or not. We're building a rail line through here, and we need clear title to the land. If you refuse to sell, we'll have other options." "Like what?" "Eminent domain, legal action. We have lawyers." "Mr. Hale, a lot of them." Rowan stepped forward, and Lila saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched at his sides. "You threatening me?" "I'm informing you of the situation. Then let me inform you of mine. This land is mine. I bought it, I worked it, and I'm keeping it. You and your company can go to hell." Greer's face went red. "You're making a mistake. I've made worse." The man stared at him for a long moment, then turned and climbed back onto his horse. "You'll regret this," he said. "I doubt it." Greer rode off, and Rowan stood there watching him go, his jaw tight. Lila came over, her heart pounding. What was that about? Nothing, just some company trying to buy up land. He said they'd use legal action. Let them try. "Rowan, I'm not selling." He turned to look at her, his eyes hard. "This is our land, ours, and I'm not giving it up." She nodded, but the worry sat heavy in her chest. Over the next few weeks, more men came. Different agents, different offers, but the message was always the same. Sell, or we'll take it anyway. Rowan refused every time, and each refusal made the threats a little sharper, a little more real. Lila could see the strain wearing on him. He slept less, worked harder, and his temper, usually so controlled, started to fray. One night, after another visit from another agent, he came inside and threw his hat across the room. "They're not going to stop," Lila said quietly. "I know. So what do we do?" "We hold on." "For how long?" "As long as it takes." She crossed to him, putting her hands on his arms. "We can't fight a whole company, Rowan. They have money, lawyers, power. We have nothing. We have this land. And if they take it anyway, then we fight harder." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him it wasn't worth it, but she could see in his eyes that this wasn't just about the land. It was about everything they'd built, everything they'd fought for. It was about refusing to be pushed around, to be told what they could and couldn't have. "All right," she said. "Then we fight." But fighting meant more than just refusing to sell. It meant lawyers, and lawyers meant money they didn't have. Lila started going through their supplies, their savings, trying to figure out what they could spare. It wasn't much. Barely anything. But there was one thing. Her mother's ring. She'd kept it hidden in the bottom of her bag since she'd arrived. A small gold band with a tiny stone. The only thing she had left from her old life. It wasn't worth much, but it might be enough. She didn't tell Rowan, just wrapped it in a cloth and tucked it into her pocket the next time they went to town. While Rowan was at the blacksmith, she slipped into the general store and asked to speak to the man who bought jewelry. He looked at the ring, weighed it in his hand, and offered her a price that made her stomach turn. It was a fraction of what it was worth, but she didn't have a choice. She took the money and put it in her pocket, and when Rowan came to collect her, she smiled and said nothing. That night she gave him the money. He stared at it, confused. "Where did this come from?" I sold something. What? It doesn't matter. Lila. It doesn't matter, she said again, firmer this time. What matters is we can hire a lawyer now. Someone who can fight back. He looked at the money, then at her, and something in his expression broke. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. This is our fight. Both of us. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, and she felt the tension in his body start to ease. They hired a lawyer, a sharp-eyed man from the city who listened to their story and agreed to take the case. It wasn't a guarantee, he warned them. The company had resources, connections, and they weren't afraid to use them. But he'd do what he could. The weeks that followed were brutal. More letters came, more threats, and the lawyer filed motion after motion, fighting to keep the company at bay. The strain wore on both of them, but they held on, working the land, keeping the cabin, refusing to let go. And then, one evening, the lawyer rode out to the cabin with news. They're dropping it, he said. Rowan stared at him. What? The company. They're withdrawing their claim. Too much bad press, too much pushback from other landowners. They decided it wasn't worth the fight. Lila felt her knees go weak. We won? You won. Rowan let out a breath, and Lila saw the relief flood his face. He turned to her, and she threw her arms around him, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. We did it, she said. Yeah, we did. The lawyer left, and they stood there in the fading light, holding each other, and Lila felt something inside her shift. They'd fought, and they'd won. Not because they were stronger or smarter or luckier, but because they'd refused to give up. That night they celebrated. Rowan opened a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving, and they drank and talked and laughed until the fire burned low. And when they finally went to bed, Rowan pulled her close and whispered, I couldn't have done this without you. Yes, you could have. No, I couldn't. She kissed him, and they made love slowly, tenderly, and afterward they lay tangled together, the world outside quiet and still. But there was still one thing that needed to be settled. The next morning, Lila woke to find Rowan sitting at the table, staring at a piece of paper. She came over and saw it was a letter, the handwriting neat and formal. What is it? She asked. A letter from your father. Her stomach dropped. What? It came yesterday. I forgot to give it to you. She took it from him, her hand shaking, and opened it. The words blurred together at first, but she forced herself to focus. It was short. Her father was writing to inform her that the debt had been cleared. The arrangement with Rowan had been fulfilled, and she was free to return home if she wished. Lila read it twice, then set it down, her throat tight. You're free, Rowan said quietly. The debt's paid. You don't have to stay here anymore. She looked at him and saw the fear in his eyes, the fear that she'd take the offer, that she'd leave. I know, she said. So what do you want to do? She thought about it, about the city, about her old life, about everything she'd left behind. And then she thought about the cabin, about the land, about the man sitting in front of her. I want to burn this letter, she said. He blinked. What? I want to burn it because I'm not leaving. Not now, not ever. This is my home. You're my home. Lila, I mean it. I'm not here because of a debt or because I don't have anywhere else to go. I'm here because I choose to be, and that's never going to change. He stood and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. You're sure? I'm sure. He kissed her, hard and desperate, and when they pulled apart, he took the letter from her hand and tossed it into the stove. They watched it burn, the paper curling and blackening, and when it was nothing but ash, Rowan turned to her. Marry me, he said. She laughed. We're already married. Not really, not the way I want. I want to do it right. No debts, no arrangements, just you and me, choosing each other. Her eyes filled with tears. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. They got married a week later, just the two of them, standing in front of the cabin with the sky wide and open above them. There was no preacher, no guests, no ceremony, just their hands joined and their words spoken, simple and true. I choose you, Rowan said. I choose you, Lila said back. And that was enough. They built a life together after that. A real life, not one dictated by obligation or fear, but one they chose every single day. They expanded the herd, planted the garden, fixed up the cabin bit by bit. It was hard work, and there were days when the land fought them and the weather turned cruel, and they were both too tired to do anything but collapse into bed. But there were good days too, days when the sun was warm and the sky was clear and the work felt satisfying instead of exhausting. Days when they sat together on the porch and watched the sunset and didn't need to say a word. Days when Rowan made her laugh so hard she couldn't breathe, or when Lila cooked something that actually turned out right and Rowan ate 3 helpings. They fought sometimes, about small things, about big things, about nothing at all. But they always came back to each other, always found their way through. And slowly, carefully, the cabin stopped feeling like a place they were trying to survive and started feeling like a place they were building a future. One evening, nearly a year after the letter had burned, Lila stood outside and looked at the land stretching out before her. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold, and she felt a hand on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" Rowan asked. "How different everything is now." "Good different or bad different?" "Good." She turned to look at him. "Really good." He smiled, and she leaned into him, and they stood there together as the light faded and the stars began to come out. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Regret what?" "Staying, choosing this. Not once. Not even when the roof leaked and flooded half the cabin?" She laughed. "Not even then." "Or when the cow kicked me and I couldn't work for a week?" "Especially not then. I liked being in charge." He grinned. "I bet you did." They stood there a while longer, and then Rowan spoke again, his voice softer. "I love you," he said. It was the first time he'd said it out loud, and Lila felt her breath catch. "I love you too," she said. He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I know I don't say it enough. I know I'm not good with words, but I need you to know. You're everything to me. This place, this life, none of it means anything without you." "Rowan, let me finish." He took a breath. "I've spent most of my life alone, and I told myself that was fine, that I didn't need anyone. But I was lying. I needed someone. I just didn't know it until you got here. And now I can't imagine going back to the way things were. I don't want to." She reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "You won't have to. I'm not going anywhere." "Promise?" "Promise." He kissed her, and she kissed him back. And when they finally pulled apart, the sky was dark, and the stars were out in full. They went inside together, and Rowan built up the fire while Lila made coffee. They sat at the table talking about nothing and everything, and Lila felt a contentment she'd never known before. This was what she'd been looking for. Not a perfect life, not an easy one, but one that was hers. One she'd built with her own hands, her own choices. One that mattered. The months passed, and the seasons changed. Winter came hard and cold, and they huddled together by the fire, rationing supplies and waiting for the thaw. Spring arrived with mud and rain, and they planted the garden and watched it grow. Summer brought heat and long days of work, and fall brought the harvest and the preparations for the next winter. And through it all, they held on to each other. One night, as they lay in bed, Lila felt Rowan's hand on her stomach. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About the future. About what comes next." What do you think comes next?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. But whatever it is, I want to face it with you." "You will." "Good." She turned to look at him, and in the dim light, she saw the man she'd come to know. Not the silent, distant stranger who'd greeted her that first day, but someone real and flawed and human. Someone who'd fought for her, who'd chosen her, who'd built a life with her. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For giving me a chance, for not giving up on me." "I could say the same thing." She smiled. "Then we're even." "Yeah, I guess we are." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and when Lila woke the next morning, the sun was streaming through the window and Rowan was already up, making coffee. She got up and joined him, and they sat together at the table, drinking coffee and watching the light spread across the land. "You know what I realized?" Lila said. "What?" I'm happy. Rowan looked at her, and something warm and soft filled his eyes. Yeah, me too. And it was true. They'd come from different places, started from nothing, built a life on hard ground and harder work. They'd fought the land, the weather, the gossip, the threats. They'd fought each other and themselves and the fear that they weren't enough. But they'd won. Not because they were perfect, not because everything had gone smoothly, but because they'd chosen each other. Every single day, they'd chosen each other. And that choice, that simple, stubborn refusal to give up, had made all the difference. Years later, when people asked Lila how she'd ended up out on the frontier, married to a man she'd never met, she'd smile and say it was complicated. And it was. But it was also simple. She'd been sent there as a transaction, a way to clear a debt. But she'd stayed because she'd found something worth staying for. Not just a place, not just a life, but a person. Someone who saw her, who valued her, who chose her the same way she chose him. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The land was still hard. The work was still brutal. The winters were still cold and the summers were still hot. And there were days when everything seemed to go wrong at once. But they faced it together. And that made all the difference. One evening, many years later, Lila stood on the porch and looked out at the land. The cabin had been expanded, the barn rebuilt, the herd grown. There were neighbors now, a few other families who'd settled nearby, and the town had grown too. But this place, this land, was still theirs. Rowan came out and stood beside her, his hair more gray than dark now, his face lined with years of sun and wind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything. Nothing. That's specific." She laughed. "I was just thinking about how far we've come." "Yeah, we have." "You ever regret it?" "Not once." "Not even when I burned the bread so bad you couldn't eat it?" He grinned. "Not even then." She leaned into him, and he put his arm around her, and they stood there together as the sun set and the sky turned gold. This was their life, hard-won, imperfect, real. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.